Thanks, April. And good evening, everybody. So this is not one of my favorite talks to give, but it's really a necessary talk. I'd much rather be talking about the large birds behind me here that are black instead of the ones that I'm about to talk about. Turkeys are probably a little more agreeable with the most of our audience here. At least they are with me. So let me start sharing my screen here. Per the request, I was supposed to come on and talk solely about black vultures, but April had emailed me, I guess based on the survey that y'all took as part of your registration, that coyotes were also a concern. So I kind of looped them both in here, and hopefully it'll get you some information on that as well. They're really, the top two concerns for most of our livestock producers on the wildlife side, at least. And there's some fairly simple tools that we have available that you need to be aware of that may help at least tamp down some of the problems you have experienced in the past to keep them from hopefully happening in the future. So let's get a little bit into the vulture side of things. First and foremost, I always like to talk a little bit about why we should care about vultures in general. Most folks see them really as a pest because of issues they've had with them, and that's understandable, right? If you're suffering losses from any animal or any disease, you're going to view it in a negative fashion. But keep in mind why they exist. They are, first and foremost, black vultures and turkey vultures are both native species to Kentucky. Both of them took a pretty big hit, same as the bald eagle, peregrine falcon with DDT. Their populations got knocked way back. They're experiencing egg-related issues and nest failure, just like the eagles did, as it related to DDT. So they've kind of been on this slow recovery, which is why really in the last 20 years we've been seeing more and more of a problem with them locally. It's because our populations have definitely come back. Now, primarily, both of them will feed on dead animals, carrion. It's a really important ecological service. It helps actually keep disease issues down in the landscape, whether that's within wildlife themselves or potentially those that can actually transfer over to our livestock-related species. Now, with that said, there's a big difference between both species. The one is the turkey vulture is actually not a concern at all. It is solely a carrion feeder. So it'll only feed upon animals that have already passed away. So that's important to keep in mind as we talk about things to consider with dealing with vultures. Is if you have turkey vultures, you have nothing really to be concerned about in terms of livestock. Black vultures, however, really have this nature about them within their behavior that they're definitely more aggressive. They have some interesting cooperative feeding techniques that they've began to use, where they'll actually gang up and either chase turkey vultures off prey or actually chase down animals and kill them, which is where the whole livestock issues come around. Is that this is not something that they have learned solely to do on livestock. They have definitely learned that they can apply it to livestock to get a meal. Both of them are actually classified as migratory birds, which is where the federal protections come in. Traditionally, they do migrate. We're learning more and more about their populations, and specifically in Kentucky, we have a project in Kentucky where we put transmitters on birds this past year with juveniles. Purdue also has a project that's running along the river, putting transmitters on birds in both Indiana and Kentucky, and we see that there's some birds that do not leave for sure. However, that classification is really important when it comes to the legal aspect of things. These guys would traditionally have nested along cliff lines and brush piles, logs, now they are starting to really use tobacco barns, older farm buildings or houses that are abandoned as nesting areas, but they'll also simply nest on rooftops of buildings in cities. They're kind of, if they can drop an egg somewhere and it's not going to roll away, it might be a nest site. So they're not too picky. And one of the things that we found out here with our nest study that we're doing at UK is that these guys will defend that nest from many of the common predators that we see, things like raccoons, possums, foxes, coyotes. So their nest success is incredibly high, which is probably why their population has increased so much in the last 20 years. Now,
one comment.
Sure.
Box. It says, I thought they are classified as raptors, providing them protection.
So all of our raptors are also protected. So we actually have a special law for eagles in particular. In addition to, all raptors are also federally protected. So all the migratory birds, raptors, and eagles are all federally protected. There is, and I'm going to get into it here, some options that have been created to get around those protections. Not just for vultures, they're used for other things as well, other species, but it's one that we can apply to vultures in the state that you need to be aware of. And like I said, I'll get to that in a couple slides. So I did mention how it's important, to realize that turkey vultures are not an actual threat to any of your livestock operations, whereas black vultures can be. So it's good to talk about how to tell the difference. Because if you're looking outside and see a bunch of vultures sitting near a cow that's about to drop a calf, you probably want to know the difference real quick. So there is a few things that stand out that most folks can pick up on even from a distance. And it's important to realize that the head color is one that people often talk about. However, juvenile turkey vultures, when they're 2-3 years old, haven't gotten that adult plumage necessarily yet, and that head color is not really bright red. So they can be mistaken for a black vulture in that situation. But there's multiple features you can look at. Usually we like to say, try to pick two to make sure you're good. First and foremost, turkey vultures are actually larger than black vultures. They do have that red head, especially when they're full adults. But they will be about 2 to 3 pounds, can be up to 3 pounds larger than black vultures. Most of the features that are really useful for telling the difference are when they're actually flying. First and foremost, a turkey vulture, if you look in the picture in the bottom right here, they have a slight bend to their wing. It's almost like a V-esque shape. So it goes out and then it kind of cuts back. That's a feature that black vultures don't have, because their wing is straight all the way from their shoulder to the tip of their first primary feather there. It is a straight line. Underneath the wings, which are helpful because you're usually looking up at them when they're flying, turkey vultures will also have that silver lining underneath the feathers that extends from the body all the way to the tips of the wings. It actually increases in size as you get closer and closer to that wing tip. Whereas the black vulture, only the first couple primaries at the very tip will have that silverish appearance. The tail is also a different shape when they fly, whereas the turkey vulture is kind of a straight back. It looks almost like a rectangle, whereas the black vulture actually kind of triangles out and fans out a little bit more, which is a pretty easy one to pick up even when they're flying pretty high and bad lighting. So those three are the best ones to use when they're flying. Now, if they're on the ground or in a tree, turkey vultures will have a slight browner appearance to them than the black vulture. The black vulture can be very dark. So usually if you look at them enough, you'll start to be able to tell the difference even just from afar, but it's not necessarily the best feature to use because sunlight can make them play tricks, and it's not always perfect. Just kind of like the head. All right. So the whole part and the reason we're here is because of this whole behavior thing and issue with vultures and their aggressiveness, the black vulture's aggressiveness that's translated over. And there's a reason why black vultures are actually a little more aggressive. They tend to actually hunt and forage solely using their eyesight. Whereas the turkey vulture is quite amazing. They have the best sense of smell in the entire animal, one of the best senses of smell in the entire animal kingdom. There's a video from David Attenborough where he's in the tropics and in the rainforest, and he takes a piece of liver and he hides it in the middle of the rainforest underneath some leaves. And within 30 minutes, a turkey vulture is circling overhead over the 150-foot tall canopy because it could smell it. They can smell rotting meat from over 10 miles away, depending on the wind. So they're quite effective at finding food. Whereas black vultures, because they don't have that sense of smell, rely on a few other things. So they'll do a lot more searching visually. So they do a little bit more flying and soaring around. They also learn what can and cannot be food sources. So they'll key in on things like dead chickens piles at our chicken coops. They'll put 2 and 2 together that chicken coops mean potentially dead chickens outside, and they'll start looking and searching for those areas. One of the things that we think is happening is they are learning that cows may mean calves or opportunities for calves or other livestock. So they have search images, and they're using the landscape in ways that they've been rewarded in the past with food. They also do something where they'll be at a roost site and they share roosts with turkey vultures. So they'll be looking at the birds as they return, and they will pick up on it could be a piece of flesh on a mouth of a vulture that's coming back, or their head might be covered in blood, and they'll actually follow that bird the next morning to where, in hopes that it leads them to wherever they fed the day before. So they're kind of scavengers and thieves in many ways. And because they're following a bird that's much larger than them, fighting for that resource then is a problem, which is why they are much more aggressive, and they tend to get in these groups to chase off competitors off of whatever food they find. So we had the one comment about the legal issues, and actually their protection is it does fall under the Migratory Bird Act of 1918. They're listed within that, which means that there's a federal fine for either killing, injuring any of the birds protected under that act. And you can also not purposely disturb a nest site or destroy a nest site, as those eggs are considered a potential individual and therefore are protected as well. However, there's some leeway if you're going about your daily activities and you're not purposely doing it. Those are usually not necessarily causing problems legally for you. That's especially true considering that they like to nest in barns. There is options, and this is where it's important for you folks if you're experiencing issues, that there are permits that exist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that allow you to what we call take a black vulture for specific reasons. There's a process involved. You have to prove that you're experiencing a loss in some fashion. Okay, and like many things in the federal government, it is lengthy, involves a lot of paperwork that can be confusing. You do need to provide solid justification to validate the permit being issued to you. And one of the big things that the Farm Bureau in Kentucky has done, and many of the other states have now followed suit, is there are sub-permits that can come out of this process. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service worked with the Farm Bureau to kind of develop a system where the Farm Bureau goes through the process of applying for permits and acts as the issuer of these sub permits to folks in the state. It's a fairly simple process because the Kentucky Farm Bureau has done the lengthier process of proving something's going on. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is very well aware of the issues with black vultures. There's a lot of research that has gone into it in areas of the South, like Florida, Texas, because of previous problems. So the issuing of the permits has gotten a lot easier in that sense, where the validations, it's kind of we need these permits because our livestock producers are experiencing issues. For Fish and Wildlife Issues Farm Bureau, I think there are up to 500 sub permits, or it was 500 sub permits at one time, may have fallen to 300. It just depends on the year because they're issued in an annual basis. And I'll talk about the process of reaching out to Farm Bureau here at the end for that, because it is a nice tool to have. With all that said, there is no protection of the birds from just general harassment, as long as that harassment does not involve injuring the bird or causing them to abandon a nest. So I mentioned how, roosts play an important role for the species. It's one of the reasons they come together like that, and they tend to get larger in winter months. It's also, outside of the livestock issue we're going to talk about, is one of the other problems that we see for landowners, not just livestock producers, because of a couple different things. First and foremost, these guys eat dead animals and rotting flesh, which have diseases in them. And in order for them not to get sick from those, they have a stomach that produces an extreme amount of acid that kills everything that goes into it. Well, that acid doesn't just stay in there. It comes out when the rest of the stuff comes out. So if they are sitting on your house, on a deck, over boats, on a tree, over your pavement, on your roof, that feces will build up and actually eat through things like concrete. So that's a problem. So you don't necessarily want to have a lot of vultures sitting on your roof for very long periods of time. In addition, vultures in general, not just turkey and black vultures, have this affinity for plastic and rubber. And if you have windshield wipers, boats, motorcycle seats, spike seats, anything with rubber on it that they're near, they tend to pick at it and pull it apart and destroy it. So that can cause a pretty big issue. And then there's associated, not that vultures are incredibly noisy in terms of vocalizations, but they do, when they're in large groups. I think the one we have in Frankfurt's, oh man, some days I drive by it, it's like 300 or 400 birds, and they're sitting over somebody's house. 300 or 400 birds sitting over top of your house, is large birds, is going to make some noise. So they sometimes get in trouble for that. Most folks are a little bit more aware of the livestock issues, as they will, have gotten a lot of press. Black vultures will attack and kill animals, or kill injured animals, especially if they think they are not healthy, if they believe they can be successful and obtain a meal. Most newborn livestock are vulnerable, as they're not able to necessarily get up, run away, and protect themselves. Other animals that fall into that are your distressed adults, especially first-time calvers, maybe have problems. They can make easy targets as well. Any animal that's also sick, whether that's it could be an adult bull, if he's not doing well, vultures tend to be able, and most predators can pick up on that and will try to take advantage of that situation. Usually when we're talking about calf issues, there'll be enough vultures around where the cow may be trying to protect that calf, but she is running around to the point of exhaustion, and eventually gives up, and the vultures are able to then kill the calf and consume it. Not a pleasant way to go. Now, we have done some work with Purdue. We were trying to come up with basically a diagnostic sheet for calves that were killed by vultures, and some of the folks here, the agents, were helping with that, where we were taking animals that were suspected of being depredated by vultures over to the Heek Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. And unfortunately, and also surprisingly, most of the animals that we took over to that lab had died of other causes prior to vultures consuming them, or there wasn't any evidence that the vultures had actually been the cause of death. So things like hemorrhaging, or other signs of the animal being alive when they started feeding on it, were not present. Most of them had other health issues going on, which is part of the reason the situation is very complicated, is because these guys are scavengers, and they remove things quite quickly from the landscape. One of the parts of the research project is they were putting out dairy calves that had passed away, and the dairy calves, from the time they hit the field to the time there was nothing but bones left, could be as little as 6 to 8 hours. So these guys are really quick at finding them on the landscape. And that was randomly placing them around. So it's not like there's a known central location that animals were being put in the landscape for them to key in on. They were trying to randomly throw them out there to see how quick it was. And they're quite good at the removing thing aspect of their job in terms of ecological services. That doesn't make you guys feel any better, because you know that it can be a problem. And that's not, going to make you feel any better, unfortunately. And it is something we're trying to figure out. But we know these guys are killing calves. It is happening. So what can you do? Well, I like to put this up because there's a giant vulture roost down at the Everglades National Park Visitor Center. And, the federal government solution is to put a sign up telling you that's a problem. And then they give you towels to cover your cars up, which, as you can see, is a really effective thing. There are some options, though. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom here. We have kind of come up with a tool that we think is pretty good. It's moving it from USDA Wildlife Services used. It's called an effigy, and it's basically a fake or a real dead vulture that you hang upside down in the area that you do not want vultures around. And it's keying in on the part where vultures are actually really intelligent animals, and they can make a connection between seeing something that is their species or looks like them and is dead, and knowing that there's probably a reason that you shouldn't go land on the ground or hang out in the area because someone that looked like you is no longer with us. So it's a tool that works on corvids as well, so crows. And Patrick, I'll get to your question here in 2 slides. So we're going to cover that about deceased livestock being written off on taxes. So effigies are this thing that's a tool. And one of the things that you can do is, as you see in the bottom right here, is create your own effigy. That's in this sense, this is a cutout cardboard that they're stuffing to give it a 3D image. So if you place these in areas like Roost, which is what Wildlife Services did, usually the animals abandon the area. What we did was we came up with a publication, which I'm going to throw in the chat here. Should be. It's on this website where there's both publication about black vultures, everything I'm mostly talking about here, and also there's a publication on how to make an effigy, where we're making it out of a stall mat, and you hang it up. We want you to hang it up in your fields that you're going to use for calving prior to calving starting, and you're using that avoidance mechanism before the birds get a reward. We've heard some positive results. Some of your agents that are a part of this meeting have had folks use it. It is not 100% perfect. It is better than nothing. It's a $25, well, pre-inflation, $25 tool that takes about an hour to an hour and a half to make. That should last years because it's made out of a stall mat and some zip ties. It gives you, it's working for you 24/7. It's something you do not want to leave up all the time, but you do want to have up prior to calving, and you want to take it down when you're done calving, because the birds will figure it out. So the less time it's up and not doing, working for you necessarily and educating birds, the better. So that's probably the easiest thing to do and most effective. Now, when you use them, you want to have them so they're visible from anywhere in that pasture. And so if you have a pasture that's rolling hills or is incredibly large, you may need 2, 3 to cover that. You want to have it hanging up on a tree limb's fine, but you want to have it where it's completely visible, as you can see in the middle picture there, where it's not really silhouetted by anything. That picture in the bottom left is going to be less effective than the picture in the right, because that antenna bar is going to break the silhouette up a little bit. So I've seen and heard from folks that try to use them, but they have them leaning against a pole or they have them laying on the ground. And that's just not as effective as hanging straight up, upside down, plainly visible. You don't have to get it 20, 30 feet up. You can get it 10 feet up. But up and visible is better than against trees and not visible. Other more labor-intensive methods, and which is more useful for things like roosts than it is for trying to keep birds away from your pasture, are direct harassment of the animals. So if you are getting ready to calf and you start seeing vultures hanging out on your barns and trees, you want to go chase them away. You make it seem like it's not a good place to be. A lot of producers that have them attacking animals and they're trying to chase them away, say they just come right back. Well, yeah, they think there's going to be food there. So there's a reward there for them and an incentive for them to come right back. If there isn't any food there, they're going to move on and go hang out somewhere they're not being harassed. So if you do it on the front end and try to get them out of the area, it's going to be more effective than if there's a calf on the ground, that they know that if they stick around long enough, they're going to probably get a full belly. And that's where there's a disconnect. So anytime you see a sign of a roost developing, birds start showing up in a tree or at a barn about half an hour before sunset or at sunset, that's a pretty good sign that they're going to stick around. You want to get out there, make loud noises, spray them with a hose if you got one there, laser pointers, shoot some fireworks off, blow horns, anything to make them uncomfortable. And do that right at where it starts getting dark, where they can't quite see what's going on. They feel a little bit vulnerable. Do that. It may take a day or two, or if they've been there for weeks, it may take several weeks to make them all uncomfortable, but that'll at least get them out of the area. And, a lot of folks, well, you're just passing the problem on to somebody else. We have to work within the legal framework we have. And at this time, if you move them around, they're less efficient at killing calves or causing problems. So if you keep moving, that's what we got. Until there's a different solution, that we got to work in the legal framework we have. You can also do this in the morning, but it's better to do it at sunset because they've already got their sleep in the morning and they're going to leave anyway. So better at sunset than in the morning. Other things you can do to try to lower your risk of losing animals and livestock to these birds. Try to keep close tabs on your animals, especially as you're getting ready to calf. Most of the problems we have are calves that are less than 24 hours old. If you know an animal's in distress, do everything you can. You all already kind of know this, that, try to bring it inside, keep it in areas that it's going to be a little safer if you can. It's even better if you can calf inside, but not everyone has that option. Majority of folks do not, and the cows are not necessarily agreeable to that. But the closer tabs you keep on them, the better you can try to intercept something if an issue starts to arise. With that said, the tighter your calving window is, the better. Right? So if more calves are hitting the ground at the same time, the better prepared you may be to spend time to make sure everything's successful, as well as not providing ample opportunity for vultures to find them across time. Right? So if you calf for 2 weeks, one a day instead of 14 in 2 days, you may not have vultures on your property for the 2 days, but over 14 days, somebody's probably going to fly by and see it. Try to keep animals in the same pasture you can to just lighten the load on how much area you have to keep your eye on. Get that effigy up there prior to burst starting so it's most effective. All of those kind of will help. They're not perfect, and everyone's situation and how they run their operation is different. And I get that most folks are doing this part-time, and therefore things are a lot more complicated. And that's why that effigy is something that can be working for you 24/7 when you're not there. So this is getting to Mr. Stanley's question here. So if you think you lost a calf or any animal livestock to vultures, what should you do? Well, vultures are still listed underneath the FSA's entitlement to reimbursement for a non-expected loss or unexpected loss sanction. So first and foremost, you're going to need to get some pictures of what's going on. If you got pictures of vultures eating the calf, that's great. However, what we know is vultures eat dead animals no matter what. And one of the problems that was running into it about 3 years ago, they reviewed this. There were so many vulture claims when cow prices had dropped that FSA started questioning what was going on. And some of the documentation, I reviewed it as part of, kind of looking at what's going on. Folks were turning pictures in with like a vulture feather on a femur bone as their documentation that a vulture killed the calf. That at that point in time was working for producers. It's not going to work anymore. One of the things that they're trying to tighten things up before getting approval. So make sure you take pictures. One of the things you're looking for, and I think the next slide has it, but I'm not sure, is features that'll help to prove that it was the calf was alive when the vulture started feeding on. Some of the things that we know for sure work are things like hemorrhaging. The animal was actually alive when they started feeding, so there's blood that's coming out. If the heart is still beating, the animal is alive, blood comes out of wounds differently than, say, so the picture in the bottom left there, and the vultures tend to go after the eyes first. You can clearly see that there's a lot of hemorrhaging coming out of the eyes. Cow on the right, in the bottom right there, it does not have those features. So that's one thing that folks that are reviewing this are going to potentially look for. Get those pictures, get that animal out of the environment so you don't attract more scavengers and potentially create more problems in the short term. So get as many things as you can picture-wise, get it out of the environment, use your livestock disposal folks if that's an option in your county. Otherwise, if you can bury it at all or get it to where it's not visible, that's going to go get it out of the potential view of other vultures and attracting more vultures to the area. Those pictures, make sure you're any area that's fed on, you want to take a picture of. If you have any witnesses to the attack or that saw vultures on that calf, you want to make sure you have that documented. You can try to send it to a fish and wildlife biologist to confirm it. There's some other folks. However, what I would do is reach out directly to your FSA office and see what they want, the process, because it seems like some counties are handling it different than others in terms of what confirmation they may or need or not. We do. One of the things with this is the payment for the depredation loss happens to get issued to producers if it goes above and beyond. It causes their losses to go above and beyond annual average loss for the livestock you produce, right? So expected annual loss for dairy cows is like 7 or 8%, whereas beef cattle, it's like 3 or 4% based on the age class. So you want to make sure you're documenting any animal losses you incur throughout the year, whether that's natural losses or from vultures, because if the vulture attack is your only calf lost out of 100 calves that entire year, you're not going to get a payment. Now, if you lose 3 or 4 to other diseases and you lose 1 or 2 to vultures, that'll put you over that threshold and you will get issued the payment at the rate that FSA is paying it that year. Does that make sense? All right. The other thing we ask is just kind of let your someone know, whether it's the FSA office that you lost the calf, your county extension agent, fish and wildlife biologist. We're trying to track how many of these losses are actually occurring. And when I first started 6 years ago, I'd done a lot of surveys with cattlemen when I was going around talking about this, and it was like a 1 in 15 reporting rate when they had it. Like they're telling somebody when they had a suspected loss. That makes it really difficult for us to try to help you and also build evidence to try to change their classification at a federal level and give you options. So please report it if at all possible to somebody so that we can try to track it in the end. FSA is the best route because it's easy for them and they have a mechanism to file those away that I can get access to pretty quickly. All right. So one of the things here at the end, because I'm going to jump to coyotes, is I put in that chat, I have the link to the publications, and the Vulture publications actually has another link to the Kentucky Farm Bureau form to fill out to get a sub permit as a producer. If you have experienced livestock losses to vultures or are concerned about it. They handle that internally, and it's a free permit, sub permit. I think it allows you to take 3 vultures each year. If you have that permit, you have to report it at the end of the year if you used it or not. There's numbers associated with it. So if you end up taking a vulture, there's a number that's associated with that animal that you took. One of the things you don't want to just kill it and get rid of it. We want you to hang it up to try to help solve the problem. Use it as an effigy, so you get dual use out of it. The Farm Bureau themselves handles all of that. So reach out to your local Farm Bureau folks. If you can't find it, most of them are very aware of what's going on with that and can put you in touch or with the form that you need to fill out and how to do it. It's a relatively quick process. That's a smooth process. So I encourage you, if you're worried about vulture issues, to get that permit on the front end so you can deal with any vulture problems you have legally if you need to. Obviously, I mean lethally as well in that sense, because without that permit, anything that you use involved with potentially killing one of these birds can be confiscated. So if you use an ATV to drive out in the field, your gun, anything associated, truck, can all be confiscated. And remember that this is a federal crime, so it's not necessarily the county folks, county Fish and Wildlife officers doing it. It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife officer, and also goes to federal court, not county court. So things are a little complicated. Some folks think they're protected because they have some connections in town. That won't necessarily work if you actually get caught with this. All right, switching gears, and I'm going to kind of move through this fairly quick for the sake of time. So we have a lot of coyotes. We're going to have a lot of coyotes for a long time. They were not really, Western Kentucky may have had some coyotes naturally. We had wolves historically, and the wolves actually kept the coyotes out. Dogs don't like other dogs, and the larger the dog kills the smaller dogs. So wolves would kill coyotes, coyotes kill foxes, larger foxes kill smaller foxes. That's just the nature of canines. Coyotes, though, are incredibly adaptable to human landscapes, altered landscapes. They reproduce incredibly fast. They also can disperse 30, 40, 50 miles to colonize new areas that do not have coyotes in them. They're generalist predator. They eat a lot of different things. They're really omnivores. They get themselves in trouble for eating things like sweet corn and watermelons and all kinds of stuff. And on top of that, they have this incredibly complex social system, very similar to other canines like wolves, where they kind of keep themselves in check, which is going to come in play here in a second. But we see that they have three basic behaviors where you have resident coyotes that are the dominant ones that protect the range. Then you have the outliers that may be juveniles or younger coyotes that are waiting for a home range to open up for them to take over that territory. And then there's a completely third different behavior that's just the coyotes that just kind of wander around the landscape, never set up a territory, may wander 30, 40 square miles, only stop to breed, and then they keep wandering. So if you think about that, then in terms of your 100-acre or 200-acre farm and the dogs that you have on that farm, you may have dogs that are protecting the area. If they die, you immediately have an animal that's looking to move into it. And then on occasion, you have animals that are just wandering through. It makes management pretty difficult. The numbers we have now are pretty much consistent year in, year out. We get some ups and downs based on mange outbreaks, distemper issues. Hunting and trapping is viewed as a major control mechanism. Our seasons are incredibly liberal. And for hunting, you can basically shoot a coyote 365 days a year in the daytime. And then we have nighttime seasons right now, actually. That has been going on for years and years and years. And we still have the same number of coyotes. So if that gives you any perspective, they reproduce incredibly fast. And the less coyotes you have in an area, the more pups you'll see. They have density dependent reproduction. So if you have an area that's saturated with coyotes, the female may only have 2 pups that survive. And if it's not saturated with puppies, they may have 8, 9 puppies that survive. So they very quickly build up and replace themselves. And then you also have that dispersers that can come in and fill voids from very far away. So not only is it your management that matters in terms of the density of the population, but it's how folks are doing it 30, 40, 50 miles away and keeping those coyotes in check. So it's very complicated in terms of trying to reduce numbers. We put a lot of money and effort into knocking coyotes numbers back, poisons, full-time trappers, hunters, and we failed miserably. We still try to do it out west, and it's not working. And they use a much more aggressive poisoning regime when it was legal, and it failed. We tried to get rid of them for decades and never were able to. Which really brings you to the most effective method long-term are really the non-lethals, right? So the lethals aren't super effective. They can work to remove problem animals, which is really important to do. But if you have concerns about coyotes, the best thing you can do is invest in a livestock guardian animal. Use that whole dog versus dog thing to your advantage and have an animal that lives with your livestock 24/7 and basically is working for you. They're super effective. And there's a lot known about, and many available to get your hands on out there. So whether that's cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, even, if you're worried about coyotes, a livestock dog is a really great thing to have. There's other methods. I was talking with Philip Konopka, who's on here. A producer was having some trouble with hay, where coyotes were digging in the hay bales. There's other things that work in situations like that where you don't want to have a livestock guardian dog protect some hay bales. But you can actually do things like put up a whole bunch of flags about a foot apart from them on a rope that's a foot tall. And the coyotes don't like that movement and won't go near those hay bales or other areas that have low rewards, right? So hay bales probably has some mice in them, which is attracting the coyotes to it, or silage. So there's food, but it's not super not like chicken food where you have a high protein value. So that's enough to just kind of keep them away. So there's tools out there. Electric fencing works as well. It can work for certain situations. So there's many non-lethal options. The lethal options, I mentioned getting rid of those problem animals. You want to use the fact that territorial coyotes are going to keep other coyotes away and work for you, kind of similar to a livestock dog in many ways. So if you have adult coyotes in your area that are not causing problems, there's a very clear benefit to keeping them around because they're keeping other coyotes out. The problem lies when you have generally younger animals that are not as effective at catching and eating the mice and the voles that are out in the landscape that will start taking riskier behaviors and go after things like chickens or calves or more likely sheep and goats. Those are the times you have problems. And when that's happening, what you want to do is not necessarily get rid of all the coyotes in the area, because you may have 10 coyotes in a given area, but only one of them is causing a problem. You want to get rid of that one animal and try to keep things as stable as possible because that social system that they have in place is really important to keeping a lot of younger animals out that are more likely to cause problems. So if you're having an issue, say at a chicken coop, you want to trap that chicken coop. Snares work great. Footholds work great. There's a very steep learning curve with trapping coyotes. They're very intelligent. You get one shot at them probably before they learn that something's going on. So you want to, if you have never trapped coyotes before, you may want to reach out to someone that has to get some helpful hints. Snares are super effective in places where you have like barbed wire fence crossovers that the animal's going to go through. So that's a great tool to have. Make sure that you have them set up so that if you have a neighbor's dog running around or your dog running around, that it's not going to cause a problem. They make the stoppers on them so they can't get choked to death. We do see a lot of folks in the state and nationally where they think they have coyotes killing animals. Generally, it seems, especially with cows and calves in the East, Our coyotes, for whatever reason, don't tend to target too many cows and calves. What ends up happening is we have a lot of free ranging feral dogs that do. And we see this within Kentucky. I've gotten very few actual coyote related issues with cows. Now, goats and sheep are a different story. But with cows, it's almost always somebody's free ranging dog that's made a mess of the animal. So they're just as likely to be a culprit as a coyote. In many cases, I would say I lean more towards it could be a feral dog before a coyote when it's a cow. So keep that in mind. Either way, if you're having a problem, that's when you want to look at trapping or hunting, as long as it's a really focalized thing. Hunting coyotes or any predators can be difficult. There are folks that are pretty good at it. But just to blanket go out and hunt the area to get rid of coyotes, it is actually more likely to cause you problems long term than it is to solve problems short term. Now, that is a ton of information, all kind of jam packed. My contact info is here. As always, feel free to reach out to your extension agent, and they tend to give me a call to try to work through problems, and I'm very happy to do that. Fish and Wildlife, Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife has a Vulture page, as you can see here. But more importantly, the one I want you to pay attention to is that link right there to the Kentucky Farm Bureau permit. It's the second one down. Don't hesitate to use that. It's a really effective system. Big thing though is make sure if you get a permit, report it at the end of the year, because Fish and Wildlife annually reviews those permits and sub permits. And if Farm Bureau gets 500 sub permits, they issue 450 of them to producers, and only 25 of those producers say they used it. Fish and Wildlife is going to be less likely to issue 500 permits again the next year if only 25 people are actually using them. So if you use it, make sure you report it, because it's going to help keep that system moving, and it keeps a tool in your toolbox. Other information that's out there that you should be aware of, there's a trapper link that if you're having problems with coyotes and you don't want to trap yourself, you can try to reach out to local trappers in the area who sign up on this website, say I'm willing to trap in these counties for these species, and they give their contact information. You can reach out to them and see if you can come up with a deal. With that, I will be happy to take any questions that folks have and work through anything I may have covered too quickly or not enough detail.
I've got a quick question.
Yes, sir.
So we raise cervid. We have white-tailed deer, elk, fallow.
Mm-hmm.
In Kentucky, cervid is considered a livestock.
Mm-hmm.
Some states it's not. So we're fortunate that it falls under the Department of Agriculture and is treated as livestock.
Mm-hmm.
We are having problems with the vultures killing our fawns.
Okay.
And a fawn's protection is remaining still, not moving. And in our pens, the grass is not very tall because we have to be able to find them in order to medicate them vaccinate within 12 hours of birth. Anyways, the vultures are coming in and killing them. We have discussed the possibility of putting the Pyrenees dogs in there, but we've got 11 pens on 8 acres, and then we have another 100 acres under high fence also behind that.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, we are definitely going to try the decoys. That's the first I've heard of that. So we're going to, and a good thing is our fawning season is 2 months out of the year. It's May and June. So it's not scattered throughout the year like some cattle could be. We know it's all going to take place in the course of a month and a half. But you're saying that even with the permit, we can only take 3 in a calendar year. Is that correct?
That's per sub permit. Now you could reach out. Farm Bureau is the one that is is handling those sub permits. So you could try, if you shoot 3 and fill your sub permit, you can reach out to them and see if they're willing to give you another one. They only have so many. I've never heard of a year that they've run out. So it is all based on what they want to do. And if you're having that big of an issue, I would reach out to them and see what you can do. And that's all, like I said, there's one person in Farm Bureau that's running that and makes decisions.
We've seen that several farmers throughout the state are encountering the same problems with the blackheads, and it's becoming more of an issue than it was several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just because they're such an easy prey, a fawn is. And if it's doing it in our pens, they got to be doing it in the wild.
Yeah, they're not, because of the fawns don't tend to be out in the open, so that it's harder for them to find it.
Yeah.
Is all your fawn? You mentioned the your 100-acre pen there, and I don't know what your cervet plan has for your population, but my understanding is that those larger pens don't tend to have breeding that goes on. It's all be in the smaller pens.
Yeah, our 11 pens that is our breeding pens is over 8 acres. So that's where all the birthing goes on is in that 8 acres.
Okay.
And I don't want to put 11 dogs.
Oh, no. So the problem with the dogs is that they're hit or miss with avian. So you may have a dog in there that literally watches a vulture attack a fawn and does nothing. They're not hardwired like they are for other predators.
Right.
So some are. Other folks have. There are folks that I've talked to that've had a donkey that hates them, that will chase them off and do that. Alpacas, llamas. I've heard of a beagle that caught 3 or 4 itself. So it's just kind of hit or miss. I'm trying to think here, because with 11 pens, so how many does are you running for fawns each year? Are they all
40 right now, but we're going to get that to 60 probably next year.
Okay.
So we're hoping to be able to drop 100 to 120 fawns a year.
Yep.
Is our goal.
Have you ever gotten actual evidence of them? Because I know some of the
last year we had proof of 1.
Okay.
And then we had a couple of others that we were not positive of.
Yeah, I know sometimes you'll get the higher disease outbreaks with some of the fawns die from a ton of stuff that can happen yearly. That's why I was curious. So I don't know if you have. With that many animals, you can. And there's a reason you have 11 pens. But all of your animals are tagged. It's a little extra work, but if you can move them into 3 or 4 and potentially putting avian netting over those, it might keep them out.
Yeah.
It's the Effigy is probably your best bet at the get-go. Whether or not that does it, as soon as they get one, they're on to it.
Right.
And
we had a couple that died earlier on, and we didn't know the reason, and we never could figure out the reason. But then we had a third one that died, and we saw the vulture, and we immediately got out there, and it was in the process of dying. So we then assumed, and it could be incorrectly, but we assumed that the first 2 deaths were probably caused by vulture. Also, we're just not out there 24 hours a day to witness it.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep your eyes on.
And we're wanting to run cameras, so we're in the process of possibly putting cameras in these pens too.
Mm-hmm.
And that would serve as additional evidence. We don't have yote problems because we run electric all the way around the bottom, 3-strand, and we put yote fence guards on the bottom so they cannot tunnel under.
Yep.
So we don't have a yote problem, but anything coming over from the air is an issue.
Yeah, if they figured it out, they're so long lived that you're going to have the animals that have figured it out last year are going to come back. Trying to think. Shoot me an email, and I'm going to run, take a look at a few other options that may exist.
Okay.
and see if I can give you at least options. You know, the avian netting is one that you could go. I mean, that's what, you know, you look at pheasant production, quail production, those guys are all running that for good reason. So if you've got 8 acres, that's not unheard of. And if you think about potential losses that you may experience for a deer that could end up, you know, I know how expensive those things get. So, you know,
And is that a tax write-off?
the avian component, it's all farm expense. So it's whatever's, you know, your schedule F, you know, it's
Right.
infrastructure. You can, one of the things that we've done with livestock producer for the dairy cows is you can reach out to your county ag development folks and see if they'll allow that as potentially cost share. What county are you in?
Pendleton.
Pendleton, and I don't think our Pendleton agent's on here. That would be able to help you with that.
We
But
border
that,
Harrison, Grant, and Pendleton, but we claim Pendleton. But
yeah, that would be the one that would, the development board that would, you know, I think it has to come from that county. The ag agents that are on here may need to speak up because I may be talking out my place I shouldn't be in terms of that, because I'm not as familiar with that process. But we were able to help the dairy producers down south, and because they needed netting to keep starlings, blackbirds out, and their development board was going to help them do that, because some of those buildings it was like $20,000 or $30,000 in netting, but they were going to allow them to cost share that. So if you're talking about, you know, maybe over a multi-year process of doing a couple pens at first, see if it works. And then if it does, it might be worth the long. Sounds like you have the infrastructure in place. It'd be a long-term investment, right? Keep it down. You know, other stuff is short-term, but you know, always with wildlife damage is get your bang for your buck long-term for most things.
okay. All right.
Good luck. And
Thank you.
shoot me an email,
Will do.
please.
All right.
And then Daryl, the lifespan of a vulture, that easily 20 plus years. We expect them to live in the 20 to 30 range. They're long lived, slow to mature. We don't even actually, we suspect that they start nesting in the 3 to 5 year old range, and then we'll live for a long time. So we're still trying to figure that out.
All right. Any other questions? You're welcome to come off of mute right now if you like to ask a question. If not, then we'll go ahead and end this session.